SketchUp's strengths are really with polygonal modeling and making rectilinear forms, but with plugins we can increase the scope of what SketchUp can do to include a whole host of curvilinear forms that we collectively call organic modeling. The first organic modeling toolset is called the Sandbox, and it was initially released in SketchUp version 5. You have to load it as an extension, and after you do, you'll see the Sandbox tool palette appear. The icons suggest landscapes, which is exactly what I'm going to demonstrate here in a moment. But just because the icons tell you something about landscapes doesn't mean you can't use these for other purposes. For example, you might try making cushions on a sofa using this same tool set. These first two tools allow you to create objects from contours or from scratch. I'd like to create a landscape from contour lines that I import. So I'll go up to the File menu and choose Import. You can follow along by importing this contours drawing which I've provided, and it's a series of contour lines representing a real landscape. So SketchUp imports the results. We can just click OK, and I'll just zoom out to show you what we have here. Now these contour lines coming from AutoCAD had to be represented as a series of closed loops. And if I zoom in closely here, you'll see what I mean. Each one of these contour lines is at a separate elevation, and it forms a closed loop. We don't really need to worry about closing loops in SketchUp because this tool right here is going to create a surface for us, which automatically closes all the loops, if you will. So I'm just going to go into the top view, zoom out, go into parallel projection by pressing J, and then I'm going to go ahead and make a window selection around all of these edges right here, which represent all of the closed loops. I'm just going to get rid of them. Okay, and it may not have been perfectly accurate in terms of clipping a little bit of that information, but that's okay. We have a series of lines representing the different contours of this landscape, and we're going to let SketchUp figure it out and create an actual surface for us. Let's just take a look at Model Info under Statistics, and you'll see that we have over 13,000 edges, a pretty high number here. I'd like to reduce that count prior to creating a landscape surface. To do that, I'm going to rely on yet another Ruby script called Simplify Contours, which was also written by Google. I'm just going to drag this down out of the way so we can keep an eye on the edge count. Then I'll select everything and go up to the Plugins menu, and I've already loaded Simplify Contours, which you should see here in this menu. I'll choose that, and then we have to specify an angle. So the higher the angle that you put in here, the fewer edges will result. I'm going to type in 25 and click OK. We're going to see a progress bar down here moving across. When that gets to the other side, we're going to have fewer edges. So we're going to go from 13,000 down to 6692. So that's a great simplification of what came before. We can just undo and redo, and you'll see that it doesn't change that much. It's pretty much the same set of contours. This one is maybe a little bit more angular, but it's going to create a much simpler surface in the end. Now I'm just going to go ahead and close Model Info, select all of the new contours, and then click this button to create a surface from the contours. Again, we have a little progress bar down here, which moves rather slowly. When it's done, we'll have a surface. So here's the result, a surface and a set of edges. I'm going to select all, hold down Shift, and deselect the surface so that only the edges are selected. And then I'll press the Delete key to get rid of them. So here's the result. It actually captures every little rock and bump here in the landscape. And it's probably a little bit too much detail. Let's take a look at Model Info, and we'll see that we have over 20,000 edges and 13,000 faces here. I'd like to get these numbers down so that the model will be more responsive in terms of 3D performance. So to do that, we'll use yet another plugin called the Terrain Reshaper by Didier Boer of the Ruby Library Depot. Let's take a look at the hidden geometry to expose the internal structure of this object. The mesh was created from all of the contour lines, and it connected those contour lines kind of arbitrarily wherever the contours happen to have endpoints. This resulted in a very complicated mesh. The Terrain Reshaper will start from scratch, take a look at this information, and create a mesh composed of equilateral triangles. So it's a way of smoothing out all of the little bumps while maintaining the overall shape of the landscape. So let's just go ahead and hide the geometry again. Select the group and choose Tools, Terrain Reshaper. It takes a minute while the script is parsing the terrain, and it will give us a dialog box with some options. There's actually two dialog boxes here. This one contains the actual settings for the terrain, and this one is just for your information only. This last item here, the recommended side length, is important because it represents the edge length of a typical equilateral triangle. So if we wanted to preserve the maximum amount of detail, we would set the edge length to 2'6" or less. If we want to lose some of the bumpiness of the terrain and simplify the mesh, we'll use a larger number here. So I think I'm going to compromise by making the triangular grid have an 8-foot edge length. I'll put everything on layer 0. I'll create a group. I'll go ahead and delete the original mesh, and I'll merge any coplanar faces together. Again, this will take a little time, and in the end we'll have a much simpler mesh. There are a few issues with this mesh that we need to resolve, and the first is that some of the faces are flipped. So I'm going to double-click on the group to open it, right-click on any of these faces and say Reverse, and then just to save a little time I'll choose Orient Faces and have SketchUp do that mostly automatically. Over here it looks like we're missing some faces, and that should be relatively easy to fix because these are planar, and I should just be able to fill them in with a couple of pencil lines. This needs to be reversed. And then I can go in with the eraser tool, holding down the Option key to soften these edges and thereby get rid of them. I'll triple click to select All Connected and open up the Soften Edges dialog. Here I'll choose to soften coplanar, and most of the work is done automatically there. We can also adjust this slider to change the way that the normals are smoothed to hide most of the internal edges. It looks like we have a few problem areas that we'll just have to take care of manually. I'll just zoom in there and use the eraser tool to go ahead and soften these edges. Again, over here we have another area where we can use the eraser tool with Option held down just to go ahead and soften those edges. So we're left with a terrain which has far less information in it. It only has 1,700 edges and about 1,000 faces. Much more efficient, and yet it gets the job done and represents the landscape for us.